Okay. I don't know what something went amiss. It wasn't recording at first. In my yesterday's class, it didn't record. My laptop doesn't like this this room for some reason. It's the only room it happens in. There I am. It's time to get started. Let's see. It's slow. It's like delayed. Come on. Trying to let people in. There we go. Let's see. Got a whole, what? 7 of y'all. Big class. That's okay. Used to say more the merrier, and that's just the opposite. Fewer the better. So that's okay. But let's see. Okay. Now there's some people showing up. You know, I think I'm admitting everybody. It says it's recording, so that's good. So I probably have to share this today's lecture with what's today? Thursday. Today's Thursday? Let's see, Tuesday. So this is your first meeting. Okay, yeah, so Wednesday, yeah, okay, good. So whatever I talk about today will be good for because Wednesday, the Zoom kids for Wednesday, well, it didn't record, so I don't have anything to upload for them. And so what I'm gonna do is probably just share your class with them. So speaking of that, I gotta look at my clock here. Okay, had some technical issues. Facebook. What is this called? Zoom, Facebook, TikTok, whatever the hell. Okay, let me. Okay, we got about 53. Oh, there's still some more people. There's 7 people in class. Today is Thursday, January 14th, 2021. And you guys are biology 1160 section 2, I think, my Tuesday, Thursday class. And today's our first meeting for lecture. Huh? What? Oh, you don't have to Zoom if you're sitting here. Oh, yeah, but last time I was having a problem. Okay. So you think is it working today? Yes, sir. Great. All right. We still got people joining. There's I think there's 80 plus people in this class. So I mean register for this class. There's only like 7 here today. Zooming there's a handful. But let's see. There's still more people coming. All right. Let me and my laptop's real sluggish in here for some reason. It doesn't behave like this in any other room. I don't remember it being like this on the first day. Let me do this. What all that is. I don't know why you guys see all that. Turn that off. Okay, let me get rid of that. And let me see what this looks like. I gotta be patient with this thing. Start clicking too many times, it acts up. Okay, that's that screen. What you guys see at home is a little different. I don't like that, but I don't know if I have a choice. I don't know how to fix that. This is what you guys see at home. It's the presenter's view, I guess. You know, what you guys see looks like a normal presentation, but I don't know how to fix this.
At the top, there's a display settings in the middle. That might work.
Yeah, I see that. Yeah, duplicate slideshow. Is that what I select?
I have no idea. Maybe.
You have no idea?
I think you would. Oh, never mind.
Well, that way, there, hey, thank you. It works. Hey, I was just, it's just slow. Thanks, whoever said that. We fixed it. Yay. There's that. And I think it's recording. And I'm sharing. You have just one big slide now, you guys, zooming. Is that right?
Yes, that's what we have.
Great. Okay, let's get started. All right, and then let me see that I'm still letting people in. I guess you're going to see that stuff too. I guess you can see that. Anyway, so today's the first day, and it's your first PowerPoint. Remember, on my course, you get 3 PowerPoints. It's the first one, Anatomical Terminology. And I always start with this. You don't really have a chapter in your book called this or anything. I put this together because I wanted you guys to have a good fundamental foundation of the nomenclature and terminology and buzzwords that we use in anatomy. It's when you're studying anatomy, of course, you know, you're learning the names of all the organs and so forth. It's almost like learning another language. I mean, it really is. A lot of the stuff is either Latin, or at least Latin base, or Greek or something like that. And so to kind of help with understanding these sometimes intimidating multi-syllabic terms, I like to kind of give you a background and break it down and make sure that everybody has a understanding, a basic understanding of the basics of the terminology and why we use what we use. And so let's get started. I'm going to say, on a course like this, where do you start? You know, define some terms. You know, hey, why not? This is an anatomy class. Why not define the very term of the course? You know, what is anatomy? Now, if you're trying to figure out, you know, what anatomy is, and you got an unabridged dictionary and you looked it up, of course, you'd find like the pronunciation and the definition of some and so forth. But a lot of times you'll see some information in some brackets, like I have here, anatomy, you know, like some brackets, GK, to cut up. You know, what is that? Y'all know what that is? What that's called? That's called the etymology of the term. The etymology is like the the history of the word, you know, where it came from, what it was originally used, or sometimes it's kind of like what the term literally meant back in the day. And so GK stands for Greek. This is the word anatomy originally was a Greek term, and it literally meant to cut up or separate, to take something apart. So like when you were performing an anatomy, you're basically performing a dissection. You know, there was a point in our history when we were interested in what humans were made out of. You know, what are all those parts on the inside? You know, you're trying to understand disease and so on and so forth. You know, what's going wrong with this individual? Well, we got to take them apart and see what's going on. And so you're performing an anatomy, you know, and so it's basically, it was originally the same thing as a dissection. And in my biology labs where we used to, back when we'd have labs where we do stuff, when we have labs where I would dissect different animals, and I would tell students, you know, okay, we're going to perform a dissection. And the word dissection means to separate, like dismantle, and not just mutilate. I said, remember, it's to separate, not mutilate, you know, because we're taking it apart to analyze and study the parts, you know. And so that's kind of what that is. Well, today, I guess you can say that the modern definition of anatomy, I mean, it's a science. It's a division of biology. It's a biological science. Here I define it as the study of the structure of organisms. So organisms are built, they're put together, they have structure. And so studying all those pieces and parts is anatomy, all right? Now, look at this. This is my second term. The whole course isn't going to be like this. This is kind of, I'm just kind of introducing how I treat certain terms. But I wanted to get these first few elementary terms out the way. Morphology. Morphology. Now, if you don't know what this word is, or you've never seen it before, but with some fundamental understanding of how words are made, you can kind of figure it out. And that's kind of how I want you to approach some of the terms that you're going to be introduced to in this course. Like you see the suffix there, ology, O-L-O-G-Y. Everybody knows that. Most people understand what that means. It means the study of something or the science of something. So morphology, the study or the science of morph. What's morph? Well, the word morph literally means shape. So you're studying shapes. It's the science of shapes, I guess. Well, it's not, sometimes you can't take all this literal. I'm gonna need some liquid here in a sec. Because you'd say, well, study of shapes, isn't that like geometry? Like where you study circles and cones and squares and stuff, calculating volumes and areas? No, it's not the same thing. Morphology is it's a division of biology. It's a biological science. Okay, now it's closely allied with anatomy, and some authors use anatomy and morphology interchangeably, but they don't mean the same thing. Here I give you a honed Mr. Williams definition of morphology, what it really is. Morphology is a branch of biology dealing with the form and structure of an organism at any stage in its life history. Okay, now I want you to, let me get my laser pointer here. I pack a lot of important key words in my definition here, all right? Form and structure, you know, morph, all right, of an organism, you know, biology. At any stage in its life history of an organism, okay, at any stage in its life history. Well, what does that mean? What is life history? You got to understand what life history is. What is a life history? Well, in the scientific community, we define life Now, when does life start? You know, people argue about this all the time, but I can tell you what how we appreciate it and understand it in the scientific community. Life begins at conception, period. I said it, okay? That's it. When you're conceived, you're alive, okay? And that's when your life history begins. All right, and then you go through different stages. When you were conceived and you were one cell big, you didn't look like you look now. Now we understand this, you're only one cell, right? And that one cell divides into 2, and then 2 into 4, 8, 16, all the way up to 100 trillion cells. That's about how many cells you have in your body right now, about 100 trillion. And of course, there's changes, fundamental changes that take place in different stages of your development. Like those early stages when you're talking about just being cells, you know, that we call those the early cleavage stages. Most of those take place before implantation. Like when fertilization, we're going to learn this. The fertilization typically takes place in the fallopian tubes, and then the cleavage stages are occurring as it's traveling down the fallopian tubes. It usually takes about a week from insemination to implantation. And within that week, you go from a single cell to a whole bunch of cells that are actually implanted in the uterus. And then once the implantation takes place, you have the early embryonic stages, like an embryo. And then the embryo kind of graduates into the fetal stages. And of course, there's changes that take place in the overall shape and structure and form of the developing individual, whether it's a human or a kangaroo or whatever. There's changes that take place. And then even after birth, okay, when you're, whoops, I keep pushing, let me back up here. Even after you're born, newborn individuals don't look like adults. You know, the proportions of the bodies aren't the same. You know, like a baby's head is real big compared to the rest of its body, right? And so those are changes that take place. So morphology is studying all those changes that take place in an organism throughout its life and its life history. Okay. Now, morphology, anatomy, somewhat related, you know. This third science, physiology, study of physiology. Kind of sounds like another discipline, doesn't it? Like physics. Physics and physiology are not the same thing. Physiology is a branch of biology. Biology, you know, what is biology? Bio means life. Biology is the study of life, studying living organisms. Of course, there's all kinds of subdivisions of biology. And physiology is one of those subdivisions. But what is it? Physics isn't really a biological science. It's what they call one of the hard sciences, like math and chemistry and physics, and that's different than biology. When you're studying physics, what are you studying? Physics, you're studying like the order of the universe, natural order of the universe, how things work in the universe. Like what is light? What is magnetism? You know, what is gravity? You know, those kinds of things. That's like when you study physics, right? Well, physiology is kind of like the physics in biology. Here I have it literally the study of natural order, but my definition that I use is the study of the biological processes that enable life to exist and function, okay? Biological, you know, this is the division of biology, processes that enable life. See that 4-letter word right there? L-I-F-E? That's a key thing. Remember, biology is the study of living organisms or the study of life, all right? What is life? You know, what does that mean, life? Well, life, things that are alive versus things that are dead or things that are not living. In biology, we have a definition of life, or things that are living have to possess characteristics, certain characteristics of life, all right? So in order to be considered alive, you have to be able to do certain fundamental things. First of all, you have to have metabolism, right? You respond to a stimulus, right? You grow, all right? You know, probably one of the most important things is that you can reproduce, all right? Living things reproduce, and living things evolve. Okay, so these are all characteristics of life. And so if you're missing one of these characteristics, you're not considered alive, all right? So there's processes that enable all these fundamental characteristics to be carried on. And if there's something that interrupts one of these processes, that's known as a pathogen or a disease. In studying diseases, as pathology. And some of you that are going to go on to nursing, that's one of the first subjects you're going to study is pathology, disease, the different types of diseases. Basically what basically what diseases are is when physiology's gone wrong and there's something that causes the physiology to go wrong. But in this class, we're not studying, diseases. We're not even studying physiology. We're just studying the anatomy, and then you're going to graduate to physiology, and then from physiology, you're going to do diseases and pathology. But in anatomy, it's tough to talk about anatomy without introducing some physiology. I'm going to try to stay away from physiology the best I can, but sometimes it helps to explain what something does when you're introducing a anatomical structure. So what is this thing? Why is it? What does it do? So we talk about a little bit of phys in here, but not too much. And when you're studying physiology, the same is true. Once you get into physiology, you're still going to have all these anatomical terms lingering around, and so you have to understand those as well. So anatomy, morphology, physiology, they're all biological disciplines that are kind of interchangeable. Well, not interchangeable, but they're intertwined, I guess I should say. And anatomy, you think, wow, that's all the pieces and parts. There's all kinds of structures inside of living organisms. Well, there's biologists love to categorize things. And throughout this course, you're going to see that I categorize, compartmentalize, and rank things. And the same is true for anatomy. There's specialties or divisions of anatomy that are out there. And I want you to understand the divisions. And so in studying the terms, the titles of these divisions, it's going to help in understanding a lot of the other verbiage that we're going to use in this course. So divisions of anatomy. The first one I have, and you see this kind of works in a hierarchical fashion, going from like simple to more complex. Like the very first one I have listed. And usually that's kind of how they start out most textbooks. They start out with the simple things and then they kind of graduate up to more complex things. Cytology, or these are all going to be some kind of ology, right? Study of, science of. Cyto, what do you study when you're studying cytology? Well, anytime you see the prefix cyto, C-Y-T-O, refers to cells, okay? And so you go, oh, well, you're studying cells. And that's basically it. Here I have the study in the form and structure of cells. Okay, but there's another four-letter word for you, C-E-L-L. What is a cell? There's method to my madness. Is the reason why I'm presenting things the way I'm presenting them. Because we talked about life, living things, all right? And now I'm telling you about cells. What is a cell? A cell is the smallest unit of life, okay? It's the smallest unit of life. So in other words, there's nothing smaller than a cell that possesses those characteristics of life. There are things that are smaller than cells, like viruses are smaller than cells. As a matter of fact, that's what the viruses do. They invade cells, but they themselves are not considered alive because they don't have all those characteristics of life. They multiply, but they can't multiply by themselves. That's what they use cells for multiplying. They do kind of evolve. Yeah, they evolve, they mutate and so forth, but they don't have a metabolism. They don't really respond to a stimulus, things like that. But cells are living, okay, but they're the smallest unit. Now, if you take it one level higher in the rungs of complexity, all right, you would move from cells to tissues. And the second division of anatomy I have listed here is histology. And next week, that's what we're going to start to get into in lab for next 3 or 4 weeks. Histology is the study of tissues. Okay, so what are tissues? You know, cells and tissues are related. What makes a tissue a tissue? What tissues are collections of cells or units of cells that work together for a particular purpose. So they do something for your body. And then we're going to study the different types of tissues in histology. Because you have groups of cells that do this and other groups of cells that do that. And you can see there's all different types of tissues from all different types of cells and so forth, okay? And of course, you have cells and then tissues come together to form organs, right? And then organs, you know, like your stomach, your brain, your heart, etc. Organs come together to form organ systems, like the digestive system, the nervous system, the circulatory system. And then all the systems combined together make up the organism, all right? These levels of complexity. Then you can go beyond that if you wanted to. Groups of organisms are called populations, okay? And then groups of populations are called communities. You see how that works? And you got communities, ecosystems, and the biosphere, the whole planet, you know, it goes on and on and on. But anyway, let's get back to divisions of anatomy. Now, so we've got cells, you got tissues, and you got embryos, all right? I love this one, embryology. You go, oh, well, that sounds easy, you know, the study of the form and structure of embryos. Well, I don't really define it like that. I packed 3 important buzzwords in my definition here of embryology. Okay, what is embryology? Here I have embryology as a study of 3 things: gametogenesis, fertilization, and prenatal development. Like if you take a embryology course, these are the 3 main portions of the course that you would study. But what is gametogenesis? And here you can break down this compound term. You look at it, gametogenesis. Looks like 2 things, like 2 words, right? Like gameto, it's gamete, right? And Genesis sounds like what? Sounds like a book out of the Bible, doesn't it? Like the Holy Christian Bible or whatever. I'm not going to get all biblical and religious on you. I'm just telling you. And Genesis, I mean, that's what they used. Gametogenesis. And of course, why would they use this word? Well, if you think about what the book of Genesis is about, it's like the first book of the Bible, and it explains like where everything comes from, how things are made, how they're created, if you want to say it like that. And so you were creating or we're making what? Gametes. So gametogenesis is literally the formation of gametes. Great. What are gametes? Well, a synonymous term for gametes is sex cells, S-E-X, sex cells, C-E-L. See how I did this? My method. We define cells, right? Smallest units of life. And now I'm going to define sex. You go, oh, wow, you can define sex? Not like you would find sex on the internet. If you Google sex, you're going to find all kinds of stuff other than probably what a biologist would be interested in. In biology classes, sex only means one thing. It means gender. So like gender cells. What does that mean? Well, sex cells are gender specific cells. That's the profound topic here, is that you have certain cells that come from certain genders. Sorry, Bruce, or what's his girl name, female name now? Jenner or Bruce
Caitlin.
Jenner? Oh, thank you, Kate. Sorry, Bruce or Caitlin, whatever you want to call yourself. Remember we talked about life begins at conception. Well, at conception is when your gender is revealed. Thank you. Yeah. So you can't change that. You know, in every one of your cells, you got, you know, gender specific cells, and that is acquired at conception. Sorry. So it doesn't matter how you alter your looks, you're still going to be one sex or the other. Okay. So why do we do that? So you have certain cells. So we have genders that make certain kind of cells. What is that all about? Why do we have different genders? What's the purpose of that? Why do we have genders? To reproduce. And so to procreate, you know, to leave descendants. Every living thing. It doesn't matter if you're a human or a virus or that's not a good example because those aren't alive, right? But viruses reproduce for the same reason. But humans, oak trees, catfish, whatever, things that are alive and reproducing, they do it for a reason. They're basically to live on forever, is to be immortal, really, because they're trying to live. That's the ultimate goal of all living organisms, is to pass on their genetic material in one way or another. The best way to do it, you know. That's why things evolve and change, so life can exist. All right, and so we reproduce using gender-specific cells or sex cells, or we call that sexual reproduction. Reproducing using sexes, reproducing using genders, boys and girls, males and females, making babies, all right? But not everything does that. And so if you don't, we're talking about the whole, you know, living world, there are things that reproduce or procreate that don't have boys and girls or males and females, but they still procreate. We have a name for that. It's not sexual reproduction, it's what? Asexual reproduction. The prefix A with a dash, means without. So asexual reproduction is reproduction without gender or reproduction without sexes. So what's an example of that, asexual reproduction? How do you do that? Somebody, like a what? Here's somebody that's had a biology course before. She says binary fission. Yeah. Yeah, what does that mean? Yeah, fission means like to split in two, like a real primitive, like protozoans, you know, or like bacteria. That's what bacteria do. You got one cell that basically splits into two, and those two split into two, and so on and so forth. So they're dividing, and that's, you know, they're making new individuals. We don't do that. We don't split in two, and then all of a sudden there's two Mr. Williamses, you know. But if I could, you know, that would be asexual reproduction. Or you could, like, you may have done a little horticulture or gardening around your house. You take cuttings of a tree, you take a branch off of a bush or whatever, you cut it, strip the leaves and stick it in the dirt, and it turns into another plant. You know, you can do that with several branches and make several new plants. And so you're making new individuals, but there's no sex involved. So that's asexual reproduction. Or other things like, you know, like worms, like certain primitive worms, you cut them in half, just chop them in two, and they heal, and they basically develop new individuals. That would be asexual reproduction. There's all kinds of other examples. As a matter of fact, there's a professor on campus. Any of y'all have Dr. Cordis for lab? Any of you guys out there?
I do.
Yeah, Dr. Cordis. If you want to get an earful, ask him about his lizards. Yeah, he studies a very special type of lizard that reproduce asexually. It's asexual reproduction, a form of asexual reproduction is called parthenogenesis. And parthenogenesis literally means virgin birth. That basically what happens is the females, like most other reptiles, lay eggs, but these eggs are not fertilized. They're not fertilized because there are no males in the species. No males exist in this species of lizards he studies. The females lay eggs and the eggs develop on their own. They don't have to be fertilized. So think about that. That's kind of scary for guys, you know, that the girls are reproducing all by themselves. They don't need guys, you know. No, we don't need it. I can make my own babies, you know, and that's what they do. And that's interesting, you know, because this particular species of lizard, their ancestors used to be sexually reproducing. And they used to have guys in their species, but the males died out because the females didn't need them anymore. And so, hey, think about that, dudes. If the girls can figure it out on their own, we're history. And that's the truth. There is one problem with asexual reproduction. Does anybody know what it is? And the problem is basically doesn't exist in sexually reproducing things. So in other words, why do things reproduce sexually versus asexually? There must be an advantage to having separate sexes. What is it? Does anybody know? Is there something good other than just having fun, you know, making babies? But what's man, it's all about life and leaving offspring, okay? But the offspring you produce are different than the offspring a parthenogenic lizard produces. What are the offspring that a parthenogenic lizard produce? What do they produce? There's no males involved. Where do those eggs come from? Exclusively. They come from the female exclusively. So there's no part of any other individual involved. So those individuals are clones of the mother. So they're genetically identical. Okay? Are you genetically identical to your mother? You're not. Why? Well, because you have a father, you had a father. So your genetic makeup is different than your parents. Things that are reproduced by asexually reproducing parents or parent, they're not. So they're clones of one another. And so if you do not have if you're not genetically different than your parents, then your population is less genetically diverse. All right. And so that's how evolution works. It works on the genetic diversity in a population. And so you have a population, they're basically all clones of one another. The evolution of that species is going to be compromised. So anyway, so gametogenesis, a lot packed in there. And there, of course, there's different types of gametogenesis. When you're talking about just the formation of sperm cells or just the formation of eggs, the sperm cells is actually called spermatogenesis, and developing of eggs is called oogenesis, oogenesis, you know. And you would study that, like where it occurs. You know, it comes from certain organs. The gametogenesis or spermatogenesis occurs in the testes, producing sperm cells or the male gametes. Of course, oogenesis, the female formation, you know, the female gametes comes from the ovary, all right, in the female, etc. All right, so there's gametogenesis. And then the second thing, now we know how to make gametes. And then what are we studying here? Fertilization. So what's fertilization? What does it have to do with embryology? Well, in sexually reproducing things, like us, you make the gametes, and then what? What do you do with the gametes? Well, they have to come together, right? And depends on what species you are, what kind of organism you are. Fertilization is going to take place in different areas and different methods and so on and so forth. But fertilization, in short, is the union of gametes, So the gametes come together, the egg meets the sperm. And for us and humans and all mammals, basically, fertilization is considered internal, not like internal, like inside a bedroom. Internal as in inside the female's reproductive tract. That's all mammals are like that. So it's internal fertilization. Opposed to what? Well, external fertilization. There's no mammal that practices external fertilization. Who practices external fertilization? Whether you have the union of the gametes outside of the female's reproductive tract, basically outside in the environment. Who unites eggs and sperm like that? Can you think of a creature that does that? External fertilization.
I think some fish do.
Yes, most fish do. But I think it's confined to things that reproduce in water. Okay, so fish, most fish, and most amphibians. But when you get up to reptiles, birds, and mammals, they all practice internal fertilization. Yeah, so amphibians, most amphibians and most fish. Now, they release the gametes in the water, and then the gametes, particularly the sperm cells, swim, right? And they find the eggs. The eggs don't swim. They just kind of wait for the sperm to show up, and they fertilize them. Okay, that all takes place inside the female's reproductive tract in other groups of animals. So why is that? Why would they take place inside her body instead of just, well, where do most reptiles, birds, and mammals live? Do they live in the water? No. You don't have to go to the pond to reproduce, do you? No. So if you're not in water, how are you going to ensure that the gametes come together and are fertilized? Well, you got to produce. You have to have this environment for them to unite, for fertilization to take place. A nice, safe place to do it. And of course, what could be safer than inside mama's body, and that's why it happens, because we've kind of taken that leap from out of the pond. So now we're terrestrial, we're on the land. So we're kind of got to take some of the pond with us in the form of the female's reproductive tract, because it's got the right environment in there for fertilization to take place. So anyway, the union of gametes, whether it's internal or external. And then finally, the third thing, prenatal development. That's what probably most people think the bulk of embryology is the different stages of development of the embryo. We talk about the early cleavage stages and the embryonic stages, and then they got fetal stages. I'm sure you've heard of like first, second, third trimester and all that kind of stuff. That's be part of prenatal development of the individual before birth. Okay, so there's that. There's a lot packed in embryology. All right, now look at this number 4, another ology, division of anatomy. This is actually taking it up to one of our first body systems. Remember we talked about cells make tissues, tissues make organs, organs make organ systems, all right? And so here I have osteology, study of Anytime you see the prefix osteo, has to do something with bones, okay, bone. Now, what's bone? Well, when we study histology, you're going to hear the word bone, bone tissue, bone connective tissue, so on and so forth. But there is bone, a tissue, but there is also another one of those four-letter words, bone, an organ. Okay, B-O-N-E is a tissue, but it's also an organ. And remember what an organ is. An organ is a collection of different types of tissues. All right. And so when you're studying osteology, you're studying organs called bones, and these bones belong to a body system called the skeletal system. So osteology, you can say, oh, you're studying the skeletal system. That's an acceptable definition. Or here I have the study in the form of structure of bones. Bones, the organ. Because your body system that's known as the skeletal system is a collection of 206 different organs. And the 206 different organs are what you call the bones of your skeleton. And we're going to study that. That's going to be like on your second exam. We get it. I love bones, and I get into the bones a lot, so I devote like a whole quarter of the course just to that, basically. And so we're going to study that, bones a lot, or osteology, all right? And so there you go. That's a pretty important division of anatomy. Now, number 5 here is a close ally to osteology. It's arthrology, arthro. Like, you know, have you ever heard the word arthropoda or an arthropod? Arthro. What is it? An arthropod? What does that mean? Pod means foot. Arthro means jointed feet. So an arthropod is a joint. Those are the things with an exoskeleton. You know, like an arthropod, like a crawfish or an insect or something like that. Those are all arthropods. Anyway, or arthritis. When you hear arthritis, an itis is an inflammation, like a disease. There's a problem, a pathological condition, an inflammation of itis. You know, arthritis is inflammation of what? What's being inflamed and irritated? Your joints. Yeah, I got arthritis. You got osteoarthritis and all this kind of other arthritis. So arthrology, arthro, it's the study of joints, basically. And a joint is also called an articulation. Okay, an articulation is where 2 or more bones meet. So articulating bones or bones articulate or come together or join. Now there's a whole portion of your book, your textbook, devoted to arthrology or the study of joints. There's different classes of joints. And basically, like I said, what a joint is where 2 or more bones meet. They just come together. But they do different things. Different bones do different things when they come together. They come together and they basically fuse or whatever, or just immovable. They just stick there together like the joints in your skull. Or they might be slightly movable, like certain bones in your wrist or in your pelvis. Or they might be freely movable, like the joints in your elbows and knees and fingers and so forth. And then what's holding those bones together is different. So there's different classes and categories of joints. And I don't really have a lecture on arthrology per se, but I will talk about certain joints when we come across them in other topics. And so we're gonna touch on joints to some degree. Okay. Myology, M-Y, that's it. That's the prefix, M-Y. What is my? My means muscle. Now, when we study histology, you're going to learn that there's 3 different types of muscle. All right. There's skeletal muscle, there's cardiac muscle, and there's smooth muscle. Smooth muscle is also called visceral muscle. The word visceral means organs. So the muscle of organs. Now, myology is more at a body system. Okay. And so there must be a body system that we talk about that has certain types of muscles. Muscles as organs and more than just tissues. Yeah. Here I have myology is the study of the form and structure of skeletal muscles. So you wouldn't really study like cardiac muscle or smooth muscle or visceral muscle if you're studying myology. Myology is study of the muscular system, okay? And the muscular system is composed of organs, which are called skeletal muscles. And there's about 656 named muscles or organs in this system, okay? And we, of course, we're going to touch on that as well, all right? What time does this class get out? 12:30? 12:20? Okay. I gotta remember that. If I, because I get on a roll sometimes, and I have a clock here. But sometimes I look at it, it doesn't even register why it's there or when I'm supposed to stop. Maybe I should have an alarm clock. But this is, yeah, 12:20. Okay. So yeah, I've got, yeah, there we go. Okay. You got it down to the second. Okay. So here we go. 7, angiology. Angie. You ever heard like an angiogram, angioplasty, angie this, angie that? What is that? Anytime you hear angio, think of blood vessels. It's could be the heart, the blood vessels, and it could be lymphatic vessels. Here I have the study in the form of structure of cardiovascular and lymphatic structures. Cardiovascular, that's more at the circulatory system. Usually when you hear circulatory system, you think of heart and blood vessels like arteries and veins and capillaries and that sort of thing. But your body has 2 circulatory systems. You have the cardiovascular system that circulates blood, and then you have the lymphatic system that circulates lymph. And lymph is your body's fluid. Actually, the word lymph, L-Y-M-P-H, literally means water, like a crystal clear, like pure water. And your body, of course, is made of mostly water, like 75 to 95% of your body's mass is water, okay? And that water is locked up inside cells and outside of cells. And basically wherever it occurs, it has special names, okay? You may have heard of interstitial fluid, okay? Interstitial fluid isn't a chemical compound. It's basically just water that's outside of tissue, okay? Now, if this water's inside a lymphatic vessel, it's called lymph, all right? Now, when I say water, I don't mean 100% H2O, you know, like distilled, pure, deionized water, because there's no such thing as 100% pure water in the natural world. I mean, you don't have pure H2O with nothing else in it. Water, H2O, is the universal solvent on our planet as far as what we know, as far as living things. All living things need water. But when water exists in its liquid state, you know, it has 3 states, solid, liquid, and gas. But we use it in a liquid state. As soon as water is in a liquid state, it has things disassociating in it, things dissolving in it. So you're never going to have just water with nothing else in it, okay? So when we say water or fluid in your body, it's mostly water. Like your interstitial fluid is mostly water, your lymph is mostly water, your cerebral spinal fluid is mostly water, okay? Basically, it might just have some other stuff dissolved in it. The proportions might be different from one part of the body to the next, but that's basically what it is. Anyway, you have certain vessels, and we're going to talk about this when we talk about cardiovascular system, the circulatory system, lymphatic system, you know, why we have these different systems and what they do. Okay, that's all angiology, and we'll get into that. Okay. Number 8, neurology. That sounds pretty easy, doesn't it? Everything neuro. When you think neuro, what do you think about? You think like nerves, right? Brain, spinal cord, all that. Yeah. Neurology, I have the study in the form and structure of brain, the spinal cord, and the nerves. Those first 2 things, brain and spinal cord, constitute what we call the central nervous system. Central, like central of the body. And that's one of those kind of categorization terms, central, would categorize and compartmentalize all kinds of things in biology and in anatomy. Things are going to be either central or chief or primary, have all these kind of adjectives, so central, the main part, brain and spinal cord, kind of like one unit. And then everything else that's not brain and spinal cord would be kind of to the outside of that, not central or peripheral, okay? And that's basically what all the nerves are. They're all peripheral to the central nervous system. And so often we refer to the nerves as the peripheral nervous system. That's central nervous system and peripheral nervous system. And basically, peripheral nervous system, that's just your nerves. Central nervous system, just your brain and spinal cord. And of course, that's a significant portion of this course. We talk about all that. And then number 9, so I'll have 9 divisions. That's kind of how I have this thing put together. And it's kind of like, I kind of gave up right here because splankology, this is my junk drawer of classification. You always have a junk drawer of classification because you have this, you classify things, you do this for convenience, to group and compartmentalize things for understanding them. And you have these nice tight little groups where everything fits in there real nice and neat. But then you get all these kind of oddball things that are on this side that don't really fit well into this category or that category or whatever. Like in your kitchen, right? You got the kitchen, you got cabinetry in your kitchen, drawers, shelving, you got a place for everything. And you have a drawer for your silverware, you got a cabinet for your flatware, you got your pots over here, your pans over there, everything. And then everybody has one of these, right? One of those junk drawers where there's just random stuff goes in, like some batteries and some paper clips and a phone book from 1999, just random, just stuff that doesn't, where are the old keys? I look in the junk drawer. Well, splankology is all that other stuff. The word splankology, splanknin means entral, like your entrails, your guts, your innards, right? And so basically everything we haven't talked about so far would fall under the realm of splankology. So here I have the study of the form and structure of respiratory, gastrointestinal, urogenital, and endocrine structures. And if you look at all those structures, they all fall in a body system, one body system or another, like respiratory structures. That's the respiratory system, right? You have a body system comprised of organs that are involved in respiration, all right? Respiration is the exchanging of gases, respiratory gases, oxygen and carbon dioxide. So you have organs that are instrumental in that, like, your lungs, the trachea and the bronchi. We talk about all that. And then gastrointestinal structures. If you look at the word gastrointestinal, a lot of people like to abbreviate that GI, right? GI, gastrointestinal, or like the GI tract, right? Gastro literally means gut, but usually gastro is referring to an organ specifically, the stomach, which is, a lot of times the people will use stomach and gut interchangeably. They don't necessarily mean the same thing. The stomach per se is a specific organ or a specific section or a portion of the GI tract or your alimentary canal. Gastrointestinal, of course, the intestinal is a specific portion of the digestive system. Your intestines, basically everything downstream from the stomach. So that's all part of the digestive system, but there's more to the digestive system other than just the GI tract. And of course, we'll talk about that. And then urogenital structures. If you look at urogenital, you probably won't see this in your book. If you look at the human anatomy textbook, this is, because when you get to humans, we kind of like elevated humans and kind of separate humans from the animal kingdom by dividing out this system anyway. You look at uro is for urinary, the system associated with urine. So the urinary system is the system associated with the production, the storage, and the elimination of urine. And then genital. So, well, yeah, your genitals are involved with urine somewhat, aren't they? Yeah. Well, genital as in genitalia, that's something to do with urine, but it's more at reproduction. And so your genitalia are there because you have male and female genitalia, and those are sexually specific, right? And so and you have sexes for reproduction. So this is all kind of clumped together. So why do we do that? Why didn't you put the reproductive system with the digestive system or the nervous system or some kind of other system? Why do you stick it with the urinary system? Well, we're going to see, in most organisms other than humans, the reproductive organs and the urinary organs, there's a lot of overlap because they have the same developmental origins, okay? But in human anatomy, we typically like to split this out into a urinary system and a reproductive system. But remember, the reproductive system, there's not just one, there's two. There's a male reproductive system and a female reproductive system. Obviously, they're different, okay? And so, we'll talk about all that. And then finally, the endocrine structures. Endocrine, we're going to talk about this when we get into histology. We talk about different types of glands. You got endocrine glands and exocrine glands and so on and so forth. Well, endocrine glands are a specific type of gland because you have an endocrine system. It's the system comprised of all those glands. Well, what's so special about these glands? Well, the endocrine glands produce a specific product called hormones. And hormone means to excite. And so what are you exciting? Well, you're exciting a specific organ, or we call a target organ. And so the endocrine system controls those organs. And so it itself is a controlling and coordinating system, just like the nervous system. The nervous system is a controlling and coordinating system, but these are different. The nervous system controls and coordinates with neurotransmitters. The endocrine system controls and coordinates with hormones, okay? And of course, we're going to talk about it. Now, that's more at physiology, is about basically how those things work. And you're at somebody's drawing on here. Don't do that. Whoever did that, undo that. Thank you. Yeah, that's endocrine system. But we'll talk about the glands and classify the glands and that sort of thing. But it's basically how the hormones work and how neurotransmitters work. That's more at phys, and you'll get into that next semester. Okay, divisions of anatomy. So look at this person. Anatomical position. Doesn't she look kind of funky standing there with her? Who stands like that? Well, only models in anatomy class stand like that. What she's doing is she's showing you the anatomical position. Why is that? Well, before we get into anatomy, there's some fundamental things you need to know about as far as, when we're going to start defining terms. You always have to understand what your subject looks like, or there has to be a standard position. You can't be just all wadded up in a ball or in the fetal position or whatever. There's an anatomical position. And so here I tell you, learn the anatomical position and always remember it. And I tell you, the right and left refer to those of the subject being observed, not the observer. So never ask me, is that my right or her right? You always assume when you're talking about, say, the upper right quadrant or the lower left quadrant or the right ventricle or the left atrium, it's always the right and left of the subject, not you, them. So I'm looking at her. Obviously, this is on my picture. This is the left side of the picture. This is the right side of the picture. But when you're talking about her body, this is her right arm. This is her left arm, right leg, and so on and so forth. You see that? And so and she's standing in a certain position. She's looking at you with her palms facing forward. So this is the front. You're looking at the front. That's how you say, oh, that's her front. The back side, you'd be looking at her from behind. And so she's always like this. You got to assume this, all right? Now, this guy is standing the exact same way in the anatomical position. Now I got arrows going every which way. What are these arrows? These arrows are defining directional terms. In anatomy, there are directional terms. Just like you have directional terms, when you're going on a road trip, How do we get to Little Rock, Arkansas, or whatever? How do you get there? What direction would you start driving, you think? Well, from here, you'd probably head east on I-10 until maybe you get to I-55 maybe, and then you head north, right? And you go, maybe it's north here, isn't it? North. Those are directional terms. Your body has directional terms too, just like north, south, east, and west. And a lot of them they're paired like that. The opposite of north is south, the opposite of east is west, and so on and so forth. And so directional terms here, I tell you, they explain precisely where one body structure is in relationship to another. And when you look at them, like I said, most of them are paired, they have opposing directions. And I have a subject here, I got the little girl with her pet cat. And she says, why are you doing that? Why would I show you, when I'm talking about directional terms, show you a picture of a naked little girl and her pet cat? Is there some significance to this? Not really to having a naked little girl. I don't know if there's any significance to that. But there's significance for her to be standing next to a cat. Why is that?
The cat's on 4 legs and she's on 2.
Exactly. She's on 2 legs and her cat is on 4 legs. So she's bipedal. That's 2-legged, bipedal. And her cat is a quadruped, 4-legged. So what's the difference between a quadruped and a biped? Well, the one has 4 legs, one has 2 legs. Yeah, but it's more than that. What happens to their body axis? Their body axes are different. Because we are bipeds, our axis has changed from a horizontal axis to a vertical axis. Okay. Most vertebrates have a horizontal axis. Whether you're a quadruped or you're a fish. The fish, there's no such thing of a fish that's as a vertical axis. Well, most fish aren't. There's some weird exceptions, but most fish have fins in the front, fins in the back. And a quadruped has limbs in the front, limbs in the back. Bipeds don't have limbs in the front, limbs in the back. They have limbs below and limbs above. Okay, and so we have terms to identify where organs are in position to one another. And so you have to understand what these terms mean. And so you could use them for things with a vertical axis versus a horizontal axis, but you got to understand what the terms literally mean so you don't confuse them, because they're not always synonymous. And I'm going to show you my examples here. Look at this. The first two, I have superior and inferior, but I want you to understand what these terms literally mean. Okay, and I put the little, like the etymology of the term or what their literal translation is. Superior means above the subject. And I got an arrow going up, because if you're going to go in an arrow, if you're going to move in a direction above your subjects, that would be up this way, versus below or inferior would be down here, right? So how do you use this? Well, superior, inferior. The head, right, is superior to the hips, right? Because it's above the hips, right? That makes sense, doesn't it? You could say the hips are inferior to the head for humans. I wouldn't say that so much for a cat though, because his hips are way back here, but you might say that the cat's shoulders are superior to the cat's forelimbs, or you look closely, his ears are superior to his mouth, right? So one's like above the other, superior and inferior, up, down, that sort of thing. Now look at this. Look, these next two, the arrows going the same way. Are they synonymous? No, they're not synonymous. They mean something different, okay? But they just so happen in humans be going the same direction. The words cranial and caudal, the word cranial, like cranium is your skull. And so if you're moving in a cranial direction, you're moving in a direction toward the skull. Where's the skull located? The skull is located in your head, right? So basically you're moving towards the head. Here's the cat's head, okay? Caudal means tail, all right? Your cat has a tail over here. Well, this little girl doesn't have a tail. No, she doesn't. But she's an ape. Humans are apes. Apes are primates, and there's different types of primates. There's apes, there's monkeys, there's lemurs, there's all kinds of things. Apes are tailless. So that's how you can tell an ape from a monkey. You know, monkeys have tails, apes don't have tails. And so we don't have a tail, but we have a vestige of a tail. All vertebrates have a tail at some point in their life history, but we've lost ours. Just like a frog lost its tail. It used to have a tail when it was a tadpole. You used to have a tail when you were an embryo, and you lost it just like a tadpole lost its tail. But anyway, you have a vestige of a tail that would be connected like right here. If we could turn around, you look right where the top of the gluteal cleft, your butt crack is basically where your tail would be attached. So anyway, if you're going to move if you had a tail, it would be like right here, obviously, like the same position where the cat's tail would be. And so if you're moving in a direction towards the tail or caudally, you're moving down towards it. So that's why the arrows are kind of up and down, like superior and inferior. So here the head is cranial to the hips, or caudal to the head, or you can say her knees. Well, that wouldn't be good because you would probably want to use the word inferior. You know, the knees are inferior to the hips, and so forth. But the cat, see how they go up and down? But the cat, say head here, tail here. And if you're moving towards the tail, towards the head, you're going back from side to side. It's more of a horizontal, right? Because the axis has changed. If the cat was standing up, it'd be just like the little girls, but it's not. So it's toward the head. Now I have in parentheses here, rostral. Rostral means it can be used like cranial. The word rostral means towards the rostrum. Rostrum, R-O-S-T-R-U-M. What's your rostrum? Your rostrum is your snout. Humans don't have a snout. Not fully developed humans don't have a snout. Cats don't have much of a snout. They have more of a protruding face than a human does, but less so than like a dog, unless you're like one of them smash-faced dogs, which I'm not a fan of. Like a dachshund. Dachshund has a long snout, or a horse has a big long snout. That's its rostrum, okay? And so why do you even use that? Well, like I said, a fully developed human doesn't have a rostrum, but as in the early embryonic stages, you have a rostrum. And so if you're studying an embryo or embryological development, you would use terms like caudal and rostral, you know, in a position towards the rostrum or a position towards the tail. And so you have a tail, like in the early embryonic stages. Anyway, so those are those terms. Look at this, anterior and posterior. The word anterior means in a forward direction. Posterior means in a backward direction, or the reverse direction. So you look at these two individuals, they're facing the same way. Get it? Facing. Everybody knows that they're facing like the left side of the screen here. And if these individuals were going to proceed forward, right, they would go to the left side of the screen. They would go this way. Get that? This way. If they were going to go backwards, you know, they would go off the screen, backwards, right? Everybody knows what that means. And so features of your body can be anterior and posterior to one another, or forward and backwards in position to one another. Like, for example, her chest is anterior to her back. Or you can say her eyes are anterior to her ears, or her ears are posterior to her eyes. And then the cat, basically the same way. You can say the cat's shoulders are anterior, the cat's hips are posterior. Now, would you say that the little girl's shoulders are anterior to her hips? Would you say her hips are posterior to her shoulders? The little girl, her shoulders, are they anterior to her hips? The cat, they're anterior to the hips. But would you say that for, no, you would not say that. Why? Well, because they're not in front of one another, not anterior, posterior, they're actually superior or inferior, or they could be cranial and caudal, okay? So make sure you understand, what these terms mean. Like, look at this. See these arrows, they're going the same way. They don't mean the same thing. Ventral and dorsal don't mean the same thing as anterior and posterior, but the arrows are going the same way for a human anyway. Ventral means literally towards the belly. Ventre, I think it's French for like belly, like gut or something. Ventre, or ventral, like the belly, towards the belly. Dorsal, another word for your back is your dorsum, D-O-R-S-U-M, is your back, your dorsum. So towards the dorsum is dorsal, okay? So if you're moving in a direction towards the back, you're moving dorsally. Moving towards the belly surface, right? This is the belly surface, you'd be moving ventrally. So you would say her chest is ventral to her back, okay? Or her eyes would be more ventral to her ears. Her ears would be more dorsal. Now, would you say that for the cat is dorsal and ventral? Ventral is like towards the belly here. Dorsal is up here. So here, ventral and dorsal is the same as what? Superior and inferior. Okay, that's not the same for a human. All right. Now look, we changed their orientations. Now you're looking at them straight on. And we do this because you're looking at them, and we got this imaginary line that bisects the body right down the middle. So you got two halves of the body. You have a left half and a right half. And this is pretty profound because not all organisms are like this, okay? Humans and cats are, imagine all vertebrates have this type of symmetry we call bilateral symmetry. Bilateral means has two sides. If you have more than two sides, you have what's called radial symmetry. And that's, good grief, who has that? Well, things that if you cut them like right down the middle, you don't necessarily have a right half and a left half. There's only one way you can cut a human or cut a cat and have a right side of the cat and the left side of the cat, or right side of the human and the left side of the human, right? There's only one way you can do it, okay? But if you have like, say, like a jellyfish, there's no left side and right side of the jellyfish. You can cut it like this way, you have two halves. But you took another individual and cut it this way, you'd have the exact same two halves. So that's called radial symmetry, like a pie. If you just like a regular pie or a cake and you're cutting the cake, right? Or a pizza, you cut it, okay, you got left and right pieces or two pieces, but if you cut it the other way, the pieces would be exactly the same. But things with bilateral symmetry, like humans, there's only one way you can cut them, okay? And so that line that divides them in distinct left and right halves is the midline or the median, okay? And so things are related to that midline, okay? And so here we have two directional terms, medial and lateral. If you're moving in a direction toward the midline or the median of the body, you're moving medially, okay, or a medial direction. If you're moving away from that or out towards the sides, you're moving laterally or in a lateral direction, okay? So example, look at the shoulders. Here's the shoulder, and the breastbone is right here in the middle. right? So you can say her breastbone is medial to her shoulders, or her shoulders are lateral to her breastbone, or her eyes are lateral to her nose, or her nose is medial to her eyes, however you want to say it. Same way the cat. Cat has lateral eyes, medial nose, okay? The belly button, or umbilicus, as we're going to call it, is medial, medial to the hips, or the hips are lateral to the umbilicus, something like that. That's how you would use that. Look at this. This is kind of like one of those wishy-washy kind of terms. Intermediate. Intermediate means between. Literally between the, I say between the extreme lateral and medial. So you could say, well, here's her shoulder. Here's her sternum, middle, her breastbone, sternum. Her nipples would be intermediate to those. It's between the two. It's not all the way out in the side. It's up in the middle. It's between the two. Intermediate, an intermediate structure. Or her eyes are intermediate to her ears and nose. It's between the ears and nose. Okay. This is a fun one you probably haven't heard before. Ipsilateral. Love that. Ipsilateral. Ipsilateral refers to structures that are on the same side, lateral, ipsilateral, on the same side of the body. Now you have sides, you have left sides and right sides. So what are things that would be on the same side of the body? Well, if you have a right arm, what's another limb that's on the same side as the right arm? Well, you say the right leg, right arm, right leg, right eye. That's pretty easy. You have paired structures, things that are on that side, things on that side. Say, well, what about unpaired things? Can you think of ipsilateral structures that are unpaired? Well, everything that's superficial, for the most part, exceptions like your belly button and so forth, and a lot of some of your genitalia, most of the things are paired. But inside your body, your internal organs, not all of them are paired. Like how many stomachs do you have? One. How many livers do you have? One. How many gallbladders do you have? One. How many appendices? Yeah, that's how you say appendices. How many appendices do you have? One. Okay. You have one spleen. All right. So on and so forth. So ipsilateral structures. Can you name two internal ipsilateral structures? Two things that are on the same side of the body. You're looking internally. You have to have x-ray vision to see inside of here. Like, for example, her gallbladder would be situated like right about here, and her appendix would be situated like right about here. They're on the same side of the body, all right? So those would be ipsilateral, same side. Norm, this is, okay, that's something else I need to tell you guys. You guys in here and you guys out here. I'm teaching this human anatomy class, and I'm presenting anatomy, like normal anatomy. And you say, what's normal? If I'm not like that, am I abnormal? Yes, yeah. So this is all based on averages, typical human form, based on the morphology of our species, okay? And especially those of you that are going to go out into the real world and start working with human forms, you're going to be a nurse or some kind of other medical professional working with other individuals and dealing with their body's forms. You're going to see a lot of things that didn't look like it did in the textbook. There's going to be some things that are going to be a lot different. So everything that I'm presenting to you in this class is, based on averages. Okay, are we out of time? Okay, do I owe you 5 minutes? Oh, sorry about that. Sorry about that. So I got to go. And so I told you, see, if you don't stop me, I'm just going to go, man. I get on this roll. You won't insult me, and all the Zoom kids are probably thanking you as well. But hopefully this is recorded well, and I'm going to upload it on my courses where you see it says Zoom meetings. And I'm probably going to share this with my Tuesday, Thursday class as well. And so anyway, see you guys Tuesday. And so that you guys are the AH group, is that right? And then Tuesday is going to be the IZ group. Okay. All right. So Monday we're off, right? You don't know. So anyway, okay, we'll see you guys. Yes.